Hello and welcome to another episode of Guide Vision, a podcast. I'm Aniska Kyllönen from itSMF Finland. I'm the guest host today. So our guest today is Mark Smalley, and also known as the IT Paradigmologist. That sounds very interesting. We might know what it brings to us with the title.
This is always a challenge, my job title.
Okay.
A challenge to pronounce and a challenge to understand.
Yeah, so welcome to the podcast. And you were actually speaking in the conference yesterday, and today you had some workshops. So how did you like the 2 days that you have been in Prague?
Yeah, it was great. Well, 1.5 days so far. It was great. The conference, it was my first time to itSMF in the Czech Republic.
Okay.
I'd heard lots of positive things from Paul Wilkinson, who's presented here, I think 3 times physically and twice virtually. It's one of his favorite conferences, and I understand why. Because the audience seemed very engaged, very interested. There was a good vibe to the conference. You had a good lineup of speakers, and what I appreciated as a foreigner was that there was an English track as well as a mixed Czech and English track. So all day long I could pick up some knowledge. So that was good. Yeah, nice. And very important with conferences, I think, is there were plenty of breaks, and the breaks were pretty long. So people like to talk to people. People had ample opportunity to talk with each other, and some conferences don't do that. They start way too early in the morning with pre-breakfast sessions. Dreadful. So this is good. I like the format.
Great to hear that. So today you had this workshop, and it had an intriguing title, the Prague Dialogue. So what does that mean? Could you elaborate on that?
It's a bit of a pompous. I was thinking about the Paris Agreement. Where lots of countries come together and agree on difficult topics. I thought we should have something like the Prague Dialogue. I like the word dialogue instead of discussion. Discussion rhymes with percussion. So you're fighting with each other, you're exchanging arguments, and maybe I'm not even listening to you, I'm just waiting for an opportunity to make my point. Whereas in a dialogue, you're trying to understand, giving people the opportunity to talk, to share and trying to learn from each other. And it was great. We had 6 or 7, including the organizers, we had about 10 people in the room, kindly hosted by DHL. Got to give them a plug as well. And it was great, just like the conference, a good atmosphere, people showing vulnerability, willing to share their concerns at work. And we established up front what we discuss in the room stays in the room. So we established some good house rules, ground rules to play with. And people seemed comfortable with that. So we shared, we asked them 3 things. We said, what were your major learnings, takeaways from the conference itself? That was the first part of the agenda. The second one is, what are your concerns at work? What's currently troubling you? You might recall in the conference I conducted a poll with the audience where I used part of the ITIL 4 High Velocity IT book, the 5 objectives, which after publication of the book I extended to 6 objectives. I asked people, what's your highest priority? Is it making valuable investments? In other words, are you doing the right thing? Are you automating the right business processes or developing the right digital products and services for your customers? Are you doing it quickly? That's the second one. Are the resulting information systems resilient in their behavior? They will fail, but can you recover service as soon as possible? Fourthly, and this scored the highest, Are you co-creating value with the service recipients? And we could think about this for business applications, but IT service management tooling as well. You can have the greatest tools in the world, but if people aren't trained to use the functionality, I'm sure you've had the same experience as well. Even with something as basic as Word or PowerPoint, I'm sure I am only familiar with about 15 or 20% of the functionality, and I can work with that. There's so much functionality I don't even know exists. I probably don't use the functionality that I use effectively enough, but it works for me. I don't have the time to learn the proper way, so I keep following my way. So do the users of IT service management tools and applications in general, do they understand, do they know the functionality? Do they understand the functionality and use it effectively? Have they had the right training? Do they understand the information? For instance, IT service management tooling, which is not really my area, if you come across the term service in an IT service management tool, what kind of service are we talking about? Is it business service, technical service? Is it a service offering? Is it an agreed service? Are we talking about service requests? Are we talking about the service portfolio? Do you talk about the service catalog? Do you talk about the service request catalog? What are we actually talking about? So if the user doesn't understand this information, how on earth can they use that information to take better decisions and still no value has been realized? It's only when somebody acts on a decision that's been improved by information that they got out of the ITSM tooling, then the value gets realized. So you really got to look, and that's that co-creation. It's not enough to produce a service, a product or a service, but you've got to extend the value stream from design operations into use and get the end-to-end picture. We probably return to value streams later. So that was the fourth one. The fifth one is, are you concerned about assurance to governance, risk, and compliance requirements? And the final one is, are you concerned about the cost of the IT solution? Now, these were the high-level objectives that we used, that I talked about in the conference. We did a similar kind of thing in the workshop, but more specific, less abstract, more specific. We asked the participants, what are your concerns in your daily work? So that was the second part. So first we had the conference learnings. Secondly, we had the concerns that they have. And then we moved on to the final part is, so how can we combine the two, apply the learnings in the conference to come up with some principles that we could apply to improve our daily work? And as things often happen, we had a plan for the workshop. I came up with a plan together with Rob Arkershoek and with Jan Kovar. We had a plan, and we were discussing it last night. I said, guys, we got a plan, but you know how plans go. Things happen. Things happen. And halfway through the presentation, halfway through the workshop, I started to realize that we were talking about principles, whereas previously I had something else in mind. So I said, I think we should change our plan slightly. Let's focus on principles, and instead of calling the workshop and the publication that we plan to publish, the document, let's call it the Prague Principles. And what I hope, and I'm going to be suggesting this to the conference, itSMF Czech Republic conference for next year, that they revisit these principles, talk about them, and see if they can refine them, so it becomes a living document that people can think about and maybe adopt and adapt in their own. So that was what the workshop was about. Sorry for going on too long.
No, it was great. So can you tell something more about the principles themselves?
The principles came down, well, in fact, it started off, and Kaimar will be pleased with this. The first principle that was noted was stop doing stupid things. which was a great place to stop. We tried to formulate them. I'm going through my memory of what we did just an hour and a half ago. So bad is my memory. We tried to formulate them in punchy one-liners, starting with a verb, for instance. Know your stakeholders. So spend time understanding where they're coming from. Somebody referred to one of Stephen Covey's sayings, first seek to understand the other party and then seek to be understood. And because this is an interesting thing that came up, several organizations were represented in the workshop, but there was commonality in the sense that they often had two or more groups of roles, functions, that had different opinions about how things should be done. The IT service management group that was very strong on process, and the DevOps group that wasn't. And the DevOps group that didn't want to be associated with ITIL because that's not our world, that's their world. And you could talk about politics, you could talk about Catholics and Protestants, you could talk about Democrats and Republicans. This human nature, desire to identify with a group. People want to identify with, want to be one of us, not one of them. And how do you bridge that gap? And I gave the example of in Northern Ireland the troubles between the Catholics and the Protestants, of course, been going on for quite a while. The way to unify the Protestants and Catholics in Ireland is to start talking about the English, because then you've established a common enemy. So and it's, with a parallel, you need to elevate the discussion from DevOps and from IT service management to talk about what joint interests do we have. And you've got your way of doing things, and we've got our way of doing things. But at least we're facing the common enemy. That was one of the topics we talked. I forget exactly how we formulate. You'll have to wait for the publication to see the principle. But those kind of real life topics that people are suffering from.
Great. So you have written many books and edited also some. So could you tell about your books?
Well, I've written 5 books now, to my surprise. The first book was the ITIL 4 High Velocity IT module, which was quite an adventure, because I wrote it together with 22 other contributors. I wrote about half of the book, and I asked people, you're a specialist in a certain domain, please give me 2,000 words on your topic. And I asked 20 other people the same question. So I was the orchestrator of the book, trying to make some kind of coherent whole of the various bits and pieces. So that was fun. I learned a lot about that. But it was I said at the conference, I felt a little bit like a surrogate mother bearing a child for the adoptive parents and having to give the child to the new mother and father. And it's not mine anymore. So in order to get over that trauma of having to give my baby away, I wrote another book. That was my second book. And that's called Reflections on High Velocity IT. That's a book about a book.
Okay. Can you elaborate something?
Well, that was really... I had a deadline to deliver the ITIL book. I hit the deadline. I always hit deadlines. It's a matter of pride. And they wanted 60,000 words. That was the brief. I gave them 90,000. I gave them 60,000 and an extra 30,000, which they could use to publish extra additional articles, some of which they did, some of which they didn't, which is fine. But that was my book. That was the editor's cut, me, the editor. What was published was something different. So in the Reflections on High Velocity IT book, I mentioned topics that I thought of afterwards. I really should have included this. Things that I regretted I couldn't include everything. Things like Wardley mapping, which is currently becoming a hotter topic in IT. Promise theory, Mark Burgess's promise theory, would have been good to include that as well. But fortunately, these were mentioned in other ITIL books, so that's fine. So it includes and some personal anecdotes. So that was the second book. The third book was Reflections on IT Paradigmology, giving it the right pronunciation. And paradigmology really means the study of paradigms. And a paradigm is, we both wear glasses, our way of looking at the world. And I'm sure your glasses have a different strength than my glasses, so we see things differently. And what interests me in IT is the different ways that people have, the DevOps community, for instance. DevOps is a distinct way, a different way of looking at the world. Not in terms of processes, but more in terms of flow, again, value streams, topic. IT service management has a certain way of looking at things. It fascinates me, the different perspectives. So I'd say I'm a bit of a framework fetishist. Not a framework fundamentalist. That's somebody completely different. I'm not upset. I don't. It's just guidelines. It's good to have multiple guidelines because then you can pick and choose between stuff. I have great fun with that, and it's a catchy title for conferences and for publications. I'm the IT Paradigmologist. So that was the third book. Then Axelos, or rather TSO, the publisher, asked me, would I write a reference and study guide of the main High Velocity IT book, which is really a slimmed down version. So that was the fourth book. And the fifth one is also in the reflections. The books that I publish on Amazon all begin with reflections. Reflections on High Velocity IT, reflections on IT Paradigmology, and the third one is reflections on product to value. Short book. And one of the conference topics was project to product, which is the title of a book by Mick Kirsten. And it's about a different way of working, particularly in developing products, software products, not using the temporary project as a construction, how do you organize work, but more permanent product teams that live for years and are concerned with the evolution of the product. So it's the main thing. But the thing is, with Mick's book, and I checked with him, I said, have I understood it correctly? Does your value stream stop at delivering the product? He said, yeah, it does really. That's his main focus. I said, well, hang on, there's a whole world after that. After you've delivered the product, built it, it's got to be put into operations so that operations can provide a service to give people access to the product. That's the service. You afford people access to the product. So that's the next step. But we're not there yet. As I mentioned when we talked about ITSM tools not being used well, it's not good enough to provide the service. The users have actually got to use the service effectively to get value out of it. So my book, From Product to Value, talks about extending it to service and to value, and extending the concept of a value stream, getting people, and that was one of the topics in the Prague principles, the end-to-end view, looking at the bigger picture. So that was the fifth book, and I've contributed to other books as well. I'm currently involved, and this is great fun, as an editor helping other authors write their books. And one of my favorite questions, if anybody's writing a book, think about this question. Talk about the book, about your book, without talking about the content. Talk about the book, and this is difficult for authors. Talk about the book without talking about the content. And there are two classic questions which I learnt from Seth Godin, a name I'd like to drop in the podcast, marketing guru number one, the marketer's marketer, because he says, who's it for and what's it for? And whenever you're confronted with a product or a service, ask the question, who's it for? Who's it going to benefit? What's it for? What kind of problem is it going to solve? So these are the questions I ask authors to get them focusing on who's your audience. It's not everybody. You can't, if you try and please everybody, you're going to produce something mediocre. Focus on the minimum viable audience. Make sure that you serve their needs. And if it's successful, then spread the word. And you to dare to choose. That's the thing. That's scary. It's really, really scary. Dare to choose. So helping authors with that. One of the books is about value streams in IT service management, and I'm certainly not a value stream expert, but I can ask people awkward questions about what's the value of value streams, and the idea is to in the book illustrate how you can identify anti-patterns of behavior that's not productive, and replace them with more productive patterns using value stream thinking and techniques. That's really that's the basis of the book, and it was announced recently on LinkedIn. If you see it, you might have seen it, and it's got a great cover with a rocket launch. I'm not sure where the rocket's going, but the rocket has been launched. I'm working on another couple of books as well.
If we still think about the conference, so going back there, so how would you like to be remembered from this conference in Prague?
I was scared for a moment. I thought you were going to say, how do you want to be remembered? Full stop. which gets me immediately thinking of my father died almost 10 years ago now. He knew he was dying, and he came up with an epitaph for himself. It's quite emotional thinking about it, but it's such a true thing that you'll see in organizations as well. He said, I was just getting the hang of it when the music stopped. And we got the same thing with the organizations. You've just organized your work, a certain way of working, and then you get reorganized. You'll get merged with another department, or somebody comes up with a corporate change plan. We've got to change again. So the ability, the organizational resilience to change things, I think that's something we could learn. Think these things happen. It's that thing about change, really. How would I like to be remembered from the conference? I think this is the first moment of silence in the podcast. Mm-hmm. Asking questions, I think. Not giving answers, but asking questions. Giving people questions to think about. Mm. I think questions are much more important than answers. Mm. And that gets me thinking about another great quote, the Nobel Prize winner physicist Richard Feynman, mm-hmm. who talked about, he was keen on questions as well, but he was also, he emphasized his comfort with uncertainty. He said, I can live with doubt. And that he prefers the uncertainty rather than artificial truths that aren't true anyway, because things change all the time. So it's that, and that's the same kind of theme, dealing with the uncertainty of life in general and business in particular, and asking questions to help out. You can give people fish, or you can teach them to fish. And that's the same thing with questions, really. Teach people to think about questions.
Yeah, and uncertainty was also one of the topics yesterday. We talk about this framework, the complex and complicated and all these things. Cynefin, or how do you pronounce it?
Cynefin.
Okay.
And Cynefin is, I said I'm a framework fetishist, but if I had to pick out one framework that really radically changed my thinking, that was Cynefin. That was in 2013. Christian Nissen, author, lead editor of the Drive Stakeholder Value book in the ITIL, brilliant guy, fabulous guy. He introduced me to the Cynefin framework, and it really changed my way of thinking because I was a programmer. So I was programmed to think in terms of if, then, else, logic. After being confronted with the Cynefin framework, I realized there was an if, then, maybe. The uncertainty of things. And that, in fact, that was liberating because I was trying to force unpredictable reality into my programmatic if-then-else structure. It just simply didn't fit. So that was, I found it liberating, and that idea of accepting that things will happen and that you have to sense where the energy is going and move to what Dave Snowden, the guy behind the Cynefin framework, calls move to the adjacent possible, the next step. So you might zigzag in your journey, and certainly you don't have a blueprint with exactly where you're going. You might have a star that's guiding you, but you'll zigzag. The Cynefin framework, that's about uncertainty.
Yeah, and also one topic was failure, or actually the topic of the day yesterday was failure. So it's connected to this one as well.
Except things well, you don't know. You simply don't know. Lucia talked about the Cynefin framework, and she mentioned the known area and the unknown area. And it's also good to recognize that there is simply an unknowable area in the world. It cannot be known. So you can't plan for that. Things will happen. Mm-hmm. So you just have to deal with it, and you will fail. Just as long as you. That. By the way, that was one of the principles. The Prague principles was learning from mistakes and learning from failure. That was, in fact, two of them.
Okay, so good that we went there as well. Okay, so I heard a story of you carrying.
What's coming up now? What's coming up? What stories have you heard about me?
Yeah, I don't know if it's true. You can tell me, but you were carrying toilet paper in a conference. I haven't done this feat for ages. I think the last time I probably did it for about 5 years, but I think it must have been 5 years. The last time since I used it as a metaphor. I took a roll of toilet paper, put a roll of string through it, and hung it around my neck. And I asked the audience the question: what is the right way to hang up a roll of toilet paper? Is it with the flap on the outside or the flap on the inside? And just as I did the poll at the conference yesterday about the high velocity IT objectives, I did a poll on this, international poll on this. And the majority of people say, on the outside. Yeah, most people on the outside. But there are some people who are so attached to hanging up a roll of paper on the inside that whenever they find a roll of paper hang up with a flap on the outside, they'll turn it around. And you could say that's a kind of a paradigm, a way of looking at the world. This is how we see things. And you could use it with different sexist, how men see the world and women see the world, different factions see the world. But just to make people aware of the fact that there are different perspectives on things, and that we should accept this. And by the way, the correct way, or at least the way that the inventor of the toilet roll intended, was on the outside. Somebody came up with the patent drawings. He got it patented, apparently, the roll of toilet paper, and it's on the outside. Okay, good
so
to know
that's the
Yeah.
that was that. So it's true. It's true. I do strange things.
Okay. So, do you have any other interesting topic in mind that you would like to go through? Something related to the conference?
Well, something that I touched on just at the end of my talk, I mentioned the concept of IT service suffering.
That was interesting.
Thinking, and it ties in really with what we mentioned about value streams, taking it towards the user, how the user experiences IT service, and realizing that that service has an emotional effect on people. Affects people. I get, when I have to call a service, whether it's the IT service desk or whatever, I get nervous when I think about calling the service desk, because in the past I've had bad experiences, people who don't empathize with me, who don't realize I've already called 4 times about this thing and you're asking the same questions, no prior knowledge, so I don't feel taken seriously. It came up in the conference, in the side discussions, the word care. Whether you think that somebody actually cares about you. That's a pretty dominant thing. So currently I'm working in the area of what people call experience level agreement. We have service level agreement, SLA. We have XLA, experience level agreement, where we're extending. It's not a replacement. It's an extension of the service level agreement, which often focuses on output, so the observable characteristics of a service, things like utility and warranty, fitness for purpose, utility, fitness for use, warranty, availability, performance, resilience, time to recovery, warranty. That's fine, you can measure that, but that's just output. The thing is, what's the outcome in terms of its effect on people and their business? And the effect is experiential, is personal, is unique. How I experience a service will be different from how you experience a service. And it will depend on irrational things like, did I have a good night's sleep? For instance, did I have an argument with somebody today? I'm in a certain frame of mind, and that influences how I experience the service. And it's just the realization that it's unique, so there's no standard recipe. You have to sense how somebody is experiencing. You can ask them questions. I can give you a survey. What do you think about the service? How do you feel about the service? But that's difficult. Firstly, it's difficult to ask the right questions. Secondly, if I ask you how you feel about the service, feelings in particular, it's difficult to come up with the right words to articulate your feelings in words. Thirdly, you might have legitimate reasons not to tell me what you think about me. You want to save face or keep the relationship. Okay, so I never learn the truth. So surveys are one source of customer or employee experience. By the way, it's not just the customer experience, it's also the provider experience as well, because it works both ways. And people are exploring more indirect ways of establishing what the experience might be by making correlations, really making a hypothesis that if the physically, rationally observable performance response time goes above 1 second, for instance, from past experience, that correlates with an experience on a level 2 on a scale of 6, for instance. But of course, you've got to verify that hypothesis. But then you could, if you think the service has dropped the response time, or gone up too much, then you could ask people, how do you feel about things? What's your opinion? And you sort of verify that correlation. But you have to do that continuously because it's changing all the time. And it's such a fascinating area. how people experience things, and it's psychological as well. There's a guy called, I mentioned Seth Godin, who's a fabulous guy. Rory Sutherland is also a great marketing guy, and he uses the example of landing at an airport by plane. The plane stops, you realise you're not at the gate. So what's your conclusion? The bus is coming. How do I feel? Like a second-class citizen going by bus to the terminal. He says, hang on, if the flight attendant were to say, ladies and gentlemen, we've just arrived at the airport, the bus will be collecting us shortly, that means that you won't have to walk 400 yards to pick up your baggage, because we'll be dropping you off just outside the baggage area. Oh, that's good. Nothing has actually happened in the physical experience. You still go by bus, but he's given you a story to tell yourself why it's good to go by bus. So he's just reframing it. Now, just think about how we do things in IT. We are so bad in framing IT service. I think there's so much to learn from marketing of other services. I think that's a fabulous area to explore, and I'm sort of in that area at the moment, working for a company, Giarte, in the Netherlands, where I live. About 40 minutes bike ride, which is very convenient. So it's nice to go do most of work from home, but go into the office from time to time. So that's good fun as well, and good people to work with.
Yeah, so expectation management is really important, and also we can learn from psychology, we can learn from behavioral sciences. Yeah, that was a very good topic as well.
Yeah, but behavioral science, the Rory Sutherland organises a conference. It's an online event every year, and he uses, I forget exactly what he calls the conference, but it's something with BS. Not what you think, behavioral science.
Yeah.
He gets people talking about these topics, not IT people. People from other areas. Maybe there's an occasional IT person in there, but so it's great. It gives you inspiration from other disciplines. I think we in IT should expand our vision, learn from the humanities more.
Yeah, and also thinking about these expectations and what feedback can we collect. It was also one of the topics yesterday, the feedback. And one thing is about delighters. So something can delight us, but does it do it for a long time? No.
No.
So one must make a difference there.
Yeah.
Is it just a temporary thing, or?
Yeah, it's a fun. I forget who said it. It's something like the gravity of expectations, that things tend to go down.
Yeah.
So all advantage is temporary. So no, you're right. Yeah. And with some things, if you think about the quality of service from the perspectives of utility and warranty, if you think about warranty, you think about performance, response time, availability, that kind of stuff. You cannot delight somebody with warranty. You can only disappoint them less than it could have been. You're preventing something. So there's only a downside. You're defending the downside. With utility, the actual functionality, you can disappoint people with functionality if it's the wrong functionality. But you've got the opportunity, you've got an upside with functionality. You can help improve their work. But if the warranty doesn't come up to scratch, and this is the dilemma that people in IT service management and IT operations in particular have, it can only go wrong. So there's only a downside. There's long gone now, Dijkstra, probably the most famous Dutch computer scientist, who won the Turing Award, I think in the 80s or the 70s. He came up with such a great quote. He was good in one-liners. if Twitter was around in his time, he would have been, had so many million followers. He came up with a great saying. It was, computing's core challenge is how not to make a mess of it. Computing's core challenge is how not to make a mess of it. And I think that's still true, because if you think, we'll just touch on value streams very, very briefly before we start to wrap up. I think our time's running out. If you think about a value stream right at the start, somebody comes up with a brilliant idea. We're going to build this product, we're going to make a lot of money with it, it'll cost us this much, we'll make this much, after 2 years we'll get the break-even point, we'll be making money. That's the business case. That's really the potential value. Right. Then you give it to IT. IT can't, and then they develop the software and put it into production, stuff like that. IT can't really add to that initial value potential, that million a year or whatever it's going to be. That's at the start. They can only make a mess of it. There can only be value leakage because it's too late or they did the wrong thing. So only value leakage after that. So you've got the value stream at the beginning, which is value potential. Then you've got the doing of the stuff where there's only potential value leakage. And then at the end, where the users get it, that's where value is actually realized. And then you get the potential at the start. So it's good to realize that the whole, although you're probably in a silo somewhere in the middle of the value chain, you talk about your area of concern, influence. Sorry, your area of control in the middle. You can control this. You can influence other things, but you can only be concerned about some things that you can't influence. You probably can't influence the business case. You can't really influence what the end users are actually doing with it, but you should be aware of it, and you should do your best to influence what you can to contribute to that.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic, and also like the value realization, like how do you actually measure that? So that's something that organizations struggle with. So could you elaborate on that, like how to measure?
I'd tie it back to the previous thing, talking about the experience. It's not only the experience of the service interaction with IT, but it's the experience of the business results. Because we could have made $1 million a year, but for me, $1 million a year might be above expectations, but for you it might be below. So again, it's down to the particular person. What's their judgment and their feelings about it? How does it affect, going back to groups of people? People want to belong to a group. People want social status. Where do they get their status from? You've got the power dimension, the dominance, but you've also got prestige. I've achieved something, or I've done something virtuous. That's really how people where they get the status from. So you do have to think about how it affects people at a human level. So I think that's how you really measure the effect of investments, the realization of value. That's how you. But it's hard. It's hard. You can't put it in zeros and ones. There's lots of grey in between.
Yeah, and then the world changes and everything is different again. So. Thank you, Mark, for this interesting discussion, and looking forward to your following adventures in this area.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure.